mic's on, or do I have to press a button? It's on? Okay. Okay, I'm going to get us started.
Sure, sounds good.
Okay.
Is your mic on?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm glad everyone is enjoying lunch on this great day outside in Aspen. For this year's Monday lunch panel, we're delighted to have with us Karen Courington, Matt Perault, and Professor Patrick Warren for a conversation on trust, safety, and content moderation. I'm Sarah O. Lamb, Senior Fellow at the Technology Policy Institute. So I'm briefly going to introduce our speakers and we'll start our discussion. Karen Courington is Vice President within Google's Consumer Trust and Safety organization. She and her teams play a lead role in ensuring user safety across Google's wide array of products, including those powered by AI. Previously, she was Senior Director in Facebook's Product Support Operations Group, and prior to that, worked in various national security roles at the U.S. Senate, Department of Defense, and as an Air Force C-17 air pilot. Yeah. Matt Perault is the director of the Center on Technology Policy at UNC Chapel Hill, a professor of the practice at UNC's School of Information and Library Science, and a consultant on technology policy issues. Previously, Matt worked as a director of public policy at Facebook, where he led the company's global public policy planning efforts on issues such as competition, law enforcement, and human rights. Patrick Warren is a professor of economics and co-director of the Media Forensics Hub at Clemson University. Before coming to Clemson, he studied at MIT, earning a PhD in economics. His research investigates how organizations interact with the information environment. He also served on the board of the Society for Institutional and Organizational Economics, has been a visiting professor at Northwestern, and a visiting scholar at the RAND Corporation. So thank you, experts, for taking time to be with us today. Today we're going to talk about integrity of our democratic and commercial processes, from elections to consumer trust and safety in a digital and AI world. Since it's a big topic, let's first get a sense of the landscape in industry, and then talk about what we know about policy from research and evidence, and then maybe a research agenda for what it looks like to understand digital free speech issues. So Karen, I hope I could start by asking you to provide some visibility in your work in trust and safety at Google. From the outside, it seems like it's a black box, but you all are doing so much to design products, monitor services, and improve systems at scale. Can you tell us a little bit about your work?
Sure. Thanks so much, and thanks for the warm and beautiful welcome. This is really awesome, this backdrop. At Google, our mission continues to be guided by organizing the world's information and making it universally accessible and useful to our users, and our trust and safety team is really at the center of that mission. We are the people that care deeply about user safety. And so who are we? What do we do? And I've chatted with many of you in the audience over the past day or so about this. And so we are a team, a global team, working 24/7 to keep our platform safe. And we're a team, I joke that we're sort of like the hall monitors of our products, but we're keeping them safe with the rules of the road and ensuring that we're preventing abuse, and when abuse does occur, that we're remediating it quickly. And this can come across different harm types, whether it's violent extremism, child safety issues, scams, fraud, also elections, misinformation, and we're doing this 24/7 and globally. So we're a team of policy practitioners. We're also analysts and technology and technical teams and data science professionals working hand in hand to do this. And the things that we really think about in terms of user safety are, first, ensuring that we have transparent policies for people to understand. Second, working hand in hand not just with the people on our team, but also technology to scale, so automation and AI is a core part of that. And then third, designing for user safety and societal safety in partnership with government, industry, civil society as well. And so that's just a little bit about the work we do. We're busy on any given day. It runs the gamut of issues, whether it's scams and fraud, different types of abuse. But again, it's really the core mission that keeps us going about keeping our users safe and having a responsible experience.
Great, thanks. Matt, you've also seen trust and safety from inside Facebook before entering academia. What are your perspectives on the task of responding to challenges that platforms face? Like, how does it impact your research now?
Thanks so much, Sarah. Thanks so much also to Scott and Jane and others at TPI for putting on this wonderful event. It's always a pleasure, and unlike the Tuesday lunch session last year, it's amazing that it is not hailing. So one of the opportunities of moving from industry to academia has been to look at ways that we can think about translational work. So what can we learn from the research community to inform policy practice? One of the areas that we've been looking at in the last several months related to a report that we're going to release in a few weeks is about AI content labels. So provenance requirements, disclaimer requirements, and those kinds of options for curbing some of the issues that might arise in an AI world. And one of the things that has been really fascinating and enjoyable about our work is how often the general popular narrative about a potential policy intervention is different from what the research suggests we would likely see in practice. And that's true, I think, in AI content labels as well. So it hasn't come up that much today, but most policy discussions about AI, I think, often people will say, we don't really know that much about this technology, we don't exactly know the right way to govern it, but let's have at least some provenance requirements, let's have some disclaimers on deceptive content, let's make sure that people label AI-generated political content, and of course that will be good. And I don't think that we know that that's the case. So the research actually suggests, we sort of have four key findings about what the research suggests the likely impact of those policy interventions will be. One is that AI content labels do work, or are likely to work, based on other research about warning and informational labels. But those impacts are likely to be small, so they're only likely to be impactful a little bit, and they're only likely to be impactful sometimes. So bad actors might choose not to comply with AI label requirements, or AI labels might be poorly designed, and if they're poorly designed, then we won't realize even the small effects they're likely to have. And then something that I think has been dramatically underweighted in the policy conversation about this is that there are costs as well. So it might be that there are compliance costs associated with imposing AI content labels, and the result of that is that startups might struggle to compete relative to larger companies who can deploy more resources to putting in place those compliance requirements. So the thing that I repeatedly come back to in our work is that policy should be informed by evidence. Obviously, there's like an extraordinary community of academics here who are generating that kind of work to inform the policy process. In AI content labels, my sense is the policy conversation deviates currently from what we see in the evidence, and I hope that there's more alignment in the future.
And Patrick, as an economist, you conduct a lot of this empirical research that we need to have evidence. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've been tracking, especially in terms of coordinated, inauthentic actors? What is the nature of the abuse and threat out there?
Yeah, so our work at the Hub, I run this organization called the Media Forensics Hub, and our work is trying to understand lying on the internet. And there's, I don't know what the best estimate is, but 20 to 40% of the internet is probably lying. I don't know, something like that. So it's a pretty broad purview. But I want to talk a little bit about a specific sort of lying that is maybe particularly pertinent in the context of elections, and that is coordinated and authentic behavior. So troll networks, bot networks, spam networks, those sorts of things. And I want to think a little bit about how they operate, what sort of impact they might have. But before we get into those details, I want to take sort of a step back. You may be out there thinking, well, content moderation or trust and safety is important, but sort of a small part of what these platforms do. And I think that's about grossly underestimating the importance of this question. And that's because I feel like the decision about what content to serve to a given user in a given context with a given background on that user is core business decision for almost all of the major IT providers that we think about today. When Google decides what ad to serve to whom, that's a content moderation decision. When Facebook decides what products to advertise or what things to put in your feed, that's a moderation decision. When Bing decides what search results to give you and in what order, that's a content moderation decision. They have all of this content, and they have to decide how to deliver that to whom and in what context. And I'm about to teach intermediate microeconomics, okay? So intermediate microeconomics, I'm sure everyone either loved it or hated it. But one of the major things that we teach in that course is this idea that under certain conditions, the market delivers something like efficiency. And then we think through under what conditions the decision individual firms make might violate that promise, whether we might get the wrong decisions and when and why. And we think through carefully the context in which we can't just trust the free market to deliver the right answers, and it's pretty narrow. It's something like substantial external costs or benefits, some sort of public good element maybe, information problems. And so I think when we think through the policy interventions with respect to this, what I've argued to you now, huge question of content moderation, we need to think about what element of a market failure you feel like, or that you can argue in favor of, occurring in this context. And so we've thought of some, I think, today already. So something like AI created non-consensual pornography. Yeah, that has a negative effect on someone who's not party to the transaction, and therefore we think that there's scope for interventions there. So we can think through many sort of fraud, many sorts of heckler veto style interventions in the public market for, say, discourse, and think about whether there's scope for intervention there. And now, having set that big scene for you, let me return, if I can, to the particular problem that I know the most about, which is this problem of coordinated and authentic behavior on social media. So why should you care about troll networks, or why might there be a proper scope for intervention over and above perhaps what the platforms are doing? And I think the story has to come in the end to some external cost that these guys impose on us as a society that's not fully captured by the relationship between the platform and their users. Like, if the only problem with troll networks is it annoys the users, that's a problem the market solves, right? If it just annoys the users, then Google, Facebook, everybody has strong incentives to do the right sort of thing to make their users happy. But if we think there's some external benefit, some public good element to it, that's when we think there might be scope for intervention over and above. And I think the case for that is substantial. We have lots of situations, especially in the political domain, especially in the electoral domain, where we think that certain sorts of communicative acts have public good consequences over and above, say, what is determined between the particular advertiser and the person making the speech act. And so I think that sort of framework, one where we think about the protection of public goods, is probably the right one to think about in this context.
Great. And as a follow-up, and then we can go into details more, who are these bad actors? How do you find them, and how do you stop them? Like, how do you identify this is it a one group, or where are they, and how do you track them?
Sure. So there's lots of different sorts of people who might create a network of fake accounts on social media and try to intervene in conversations. In the context of political conversations, there's actually a fairly long history at this point, certainly 7 or 8 years worth of examples of state-backed actors. So actors we have clear examples from China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, who want to create networks of fake accounts to intervene in political conversations throughout the West, not just the United States. That's just what I know best. In terms of detection, I mean, it's a hard problem, as I'm sure the folks up here know. It's difficult because, the social media network is vast. A lot of people do weird stuff. Most of them are not Russians. And so thinking through about the right way to figure out if some specific set of accounts are coordinated, inauthentic, and originating from a bad actor requires actually quite, advanced technical solutions. And so I could talk a little bit about that if you'd like. It basically comes down to looking for networks of accounts that are intervening on the same conversations in ways that are technically implausible for that to have occurred if they were in fact organically disparate actors.
Yeah, Matt and Karen, do you have thoughts?
So coordinated and authentic behavior is an acute and and severe problem, but it's also a minority of the issues that we think about when we think about misinformation, right? And I think in misinformation, we have another inefficiency, which is, I think it is very difficult. We talk all the time about companies being focused on the bottom line, but companies are not exclusively focused on the bottom line, and I think are often motivated by a desire to do good in the public debate. You cannot say in the public debate, I think, misinformation doesn't matter, or the effects of misinformation are dramatically overstated. The social science literature suggests that that's the case. Maybe not that misinformation doesn't matter, but that the persuasive effects of misinformation are limited. So the current debate suggests that X's misinformation policy is going to sway the outcome of Harris versus Trump, and that is very, very unlikely to be the case, right? There might be misinformation effects, but it's very unlikely that that will be the case. Google and Meta have to design, I think because of the public narrative around this conversation, interventions as if misinformation is incredibly persuasive. And I wonder if that results in suboptimal outcomes where there might be approaches that are more censorious or restrictive related to particular pieces of content that are out of step with what the social science literature might suggest.
So just on the coordinated and authentic behavior piece, it is an egregious issue, and it's one that we follow closely. And I think this is where expertise at these companies, it's not just about the bottom line. Clearly, it's about societal benefits to our users, coming back to our first principles of designing for information accessibility and authenticity, and really for user understanding. So one of the things that we do is we focus really heavily, we have a threat analysis group that works closely with governments and others to understand what are the leads, what are the insights, what are the signals we're seeing to conduct and monitor and better understand emerging trends and threats to combat some of those bad actor networks that you're talking about in the coordinated inauthentic behavior realm, which can be particularly harmful and acute in an election context. And I would say that is just one measure, but certainly not the only measure in an elections approach or in an approach to information quality.
And in your trust and safety field, I mean, it seems like it's becoming this developed specialty, trust and safety. There are, specific areas where you have different teams, like commercial fraud is different from other types of, the influence. Can you tell us a little bit about your process and, it's become operationalized?
Yeah, so trust and safety has actually been an industry domain for a couple decades now. And so we have a lot of expertise in some of these harm types, whether it's child safety or fraud and scams. We're also really good at understanding how to work with automation to scale and stay ahead of reach and combat abuse, and also, hopefully, prevent it from happening. So that interaction with automation and humans is something we know really, really well. You mentioned earlier that I started my career as a pilot. And so this is something I think about, like automation has been in so many fields for so long. I relied heavily on autopilot to do my work. It's the same thing at Google and trust and safety teams. We're relying on automation. We're working hand in hand to develop new approaches. That's where I think that AI and the transformation we're seeing in generative AI, which I know has been the topic of much discussion at this conference, is really not only transformational, but a net additive to this domain, to trust and safety. So again, we're working hand in hand with product and engineering, but we're also adapting. So one of those examples is scams and fraud. And I think probably everyone here has had a situation where you might have seen a scam or been the target of scams. Unfortunately, it is highly prevalent. And this is one of those areas that we've seen really, unfortunately, have a rise in abuse as a result of generative AI. But we're staying ahead, and we're using new generative AI techniques like large language models to get ahead of this. So one example in our commercial abuse, which again I would say is somewhat coordinated, I mean the threat actors have an incentive for monetization in this space to deceive users, things like get-rich-quick schemes or counterfeits. Google Shopping's one example where we've seen the risk of counterfeits, and we use large language models to stay ahead of keywords and bad actors circumventing our policies using unique keywords or pricing that seems too good to be true, and really staying ahead and helping us detect and enforce at scale in a more predictive way. And so I'm very, very bullish on generative AI in this space and the use of it. I've not been more optimistic about this field and the good that we can do with this technology.
Great. And just a reminder, we still have Slido here and then questions too from the audience. Do you, Hallie? Yeah, we can have a question. Oh, I don't know if that's Hallie, I think.
Thank you so much. So over the past year, we've seen a huge exodus of trust and safety professionals from the field. So we're talking about people at tech companies as well as people at research institutions who are tracking myths and disinformation online. Given this context, what do you expect us to see this election cycle and going forward with less hallway monitors on the beat? Thank you.
So I've been in this field for over a decade, and so I'm actually not sure that we've seen a huge exodus. If anything, I was just at the Trust and Safety Professionals Association conference 2 weeks ago. It was the biggest conference they've ever had. This is a growing field. There's actually a growing recognition of companies, small, medium, and large, that they need to invest in this space. And it was really, I think the size of the conference had grown 3x in a year. So the idea that there's less investment in this space overall, it just doesn't seem to be borne out in the industry. And I think we're seeing startups in this space, whether it's trust and safety tooling, we're seeing more investment there as well. And so the growth of the industry, the recognition by companies that they need to invest in this, I think is a really, really exciting trend. Because it says to me, it's not just about it's good for business, it's also good for society in terms of that user safety and preventing harm. Curious thoughts from
Baron?
others.
Yeah, and then Harold. Baron, yeah.
Baron Soga, Tech Freedom. So to the earlier question, but both things can be true. It may be true that more and more is being invested in compliance, but at the same time, as was just noted, researchers have been hounded out of doing their work. Jim Jordan has succeeded in weaponizing the federal government to coerce Stanford University to shut down the the election integrity project at the Stanford Internet Observatory. And that's just one example of one researcher who was willing to stand up to the Republican Party's war on content moderation. So I'd like to hear the thoughts on the panel about what's going to change in the next administration, if it is a Trump administration, or in general, Republicans' ability to succeed in leveraging the threat of using the federal government against companies to coerce them to stop moderating content because they think, Republicans, that content moderation hurts them when in fact their content continues to thrive online.
So obviously, I think there needs to be significantly more governance of job owning generally, and I was frustrated by the conversation leading into the Supreme Court decision because the focus, I think, was so much on thinking about the entirety of the job owning universe as being about what's constitutional and what's not. That seems very limited to me. Every administration on day one issues an executive order to govern ethics for the administration. That's not rooted in what's lawful or what's unlawful or what's constitutional and what's unconstitutional. It's rooted in a desire to inform government employees about how they should behave. What are the norms for an administration? That has nothing to do with what the Supreme Court has decided is a violation of the First Amendment. I think we need a day one executive order, whether it's a Trump administration or a Harris administration, to lay out rules of the road for what job owning practice might be like within the administration. I'm struggling to, baked into both questions, there's the implicit assumption that relevant research in this field has been chilled. And I think that is certainly true, it seems like, in particular instances. I think it's shameful what happened with the Stanford Internet Observatory. I'm not sure, I'm curious if other academics in the room have clearer views on this, whether it's true that it's been chilled overall. My general experience in academia is actually that the gaps around the generation of academic research that directly informs the work of practitioners, whether that's government practitioners or corporate practitioners, has more to do with the incentive structure within academia, and to some extent, like what's funded and what's not, as opposed to a researcher chill. I think that's different probably over the last year. I do think there are researchers who are probably hesitant to do impact-oriented work because of what's happened politically, but I'm not sure that that's the primary thing that stands in the way of the kind of research that would be impactful to practitioners in the field.
Harold.
All right. First of all, I want to say that I totally echo Baron's concerns and am curious as to what effect it has internally within companies which are necessarily responsive. But two questions, if I may. One is, we now have at least one major platform, X, which has very publicly eliminated a good deal of its trust staff. We have a number of platforms that have grown in popularity, such as Truth Social, which make a point of not having the same kind of concern that the major platforms traditionally have. Are we seeing impact there? I mean, if this seems to me like a great natural experiment, but I mean, great in quotes, but in terms of now that we're seeing significant platforms that are eschewing the model, are we seeing significant impact and change? And just the other thing I just feel I have to mention is there's a lot of distrust in the user community, not just Republicans about big moderation, but nobody understands how content moderation works. Anecdotally, I can tell you, to the extent our organization has looked at, complaints from, nobody understands the rules, and nobody understands why my thing got flagged, or why I ended up in Facebook jail or whatever, whereas this thing over here that I find repulsive turned out to be totally okay. What can be done to increase the transparency to users about how these content moderation, where it's applied, works, and how can we make it more open, transparent, and fair?
I want to mention one more actor that I think has gotten a little nervous about funding work related to the study of lying on the internet, and that's the federal government. So the NSF had a large program in trust and safety. They called it, what was it called? It was Section F of the Convergence Accelerator Project. I forget what the name of it was, the subtitle. That project has been shut down entirely. Several elements of the national security apparatus have gotten extremely nervous about talking to the platforms and to researchers. I think that there's been a major pullback to the extent that, if we look back at 2016 and the sort of inauthentic behavior that was going on then, they sort of got away with it because not many people were watching. I mean, they were doing things like buying ads in rubles. I mean, it doesn't get much more obvious than that. In 2020, that wasn't the case. A lot of people were watching. I worry a little that in 2024, the people that could and should be watching are maybe a little afraid to be watching. That's just my sense. I can't give. I gave a few examples, but.
Curious, in your empirical work, Patrick, like what kind of data sets are you tracking and can you follow? I mean, how have you studied? Have you looked at the other platforms or?
For sure. So, as things grow and change, we've tried to grow and change with that. So, I think one of the big changes, this was the case in 2016 as well, but not to the extent, is that many of these operations are multimodal, multi-platform. So you may find an operation that's active both on Meta and on X and on sort of WordPress blogs using OpenAI to run this content. I mean, it's more, I think there is a major public good element to this where working together to try to identify things has major returns.
Can I chime in just on the transparency question? Because I think it's a really important one. And it's one of our core tenets in how we operate, user empowerment, transparency, and accountability on these issues with respect to trust and safety and content moderation. We have a transparency center around our policies where users can find out more about what are the policies, where do I go? And we also acknowledge we don't always get it right, and that's where users can appeal things that they felt that they feel were taken down in error or a wrong decision, and also report content before that they might see that might not adhere to our policies. So there's a lot out there in terms of transparency and the push. Companies are also reporting. This is something we've been doing for many, many years, is reporting on our metrics, but now more and more companies are doing so, some as part of compliance requirements and regulations as part of the DSA. But that level of transparency is something we want to put at the forefront, so I think it's a really, really important question.
I think we have a question there, yeah.
Matt, I would share your disappointment that the job owning cases weren't resolved with more clarity. And I'm also somewhat disappointed that the net choice cases on content moderation weren't more sweeping in their nature. But my question would be, and Karen, do you feel like the net choice cases from the Supreme Court in July made it clear enough that the government, whether a red state or blue state, they cannot tell your company how to do content moderation? You're going to do that in a way that suits your advertisers and users, and let the markets decide.
Look, I think a lot of this is playing out in the courts importantly, and I think the Supreme Court decision found that content moderation is a form of freedom of expression. But I will also say that we have a global affairs and a public policy team that works really closely on these issues and externally to understand the issues. And my team's work is more internal as practitioners to understand our policies and enforce them regardless of the political winds. And I think that's deeply important, is that our team is not public-facing in engaging with different sides of the aisle. We're really understanding deeply with researchers and others what's important, what's the harm, how do we enforce those policies objectively.
I think it's hard to take comfort in dicta in an opinion that that's a definitive word. I agree with you directionally, it seems encouraging, but it seems like there have been a series of cases related to tech policy that the Supreme Court has decided where there was a lot of anxiety going in or excitement going in that they would provide clarity and clear governance for tech sector going forward, or at least clarity on like the legality of certain policy proposals. And over the last couple of years, we haven't gotten that. And I don't think that you could look at the outcome of a particular decision and think it's positive or negative based on whether it aligns with your point of view. I think there's an alternative perspective as well, which is we just need more governance and more clarity here about the legality of different policy interventions and the efficacy of different policy interventions. And we continue to not get it. And I think it results then on lots of suboptimal policy proposals entering the discourse. Often I think that would probably be clearly ineffective or clearly illegal. I talked a little bit about AI content labels. There are lots of requirements that would require labels based on the content of the content. So all of a sudden, it's immediately subject to strict scrutiny, and maybe it survives, but probably does not. This is a hard hurdle to clear. Because we don't have clarity coming from the courts on that, we have an ongoing policy discussion about an intervention that probably is not going to stand up in courts. I don't think that's a helpful way to think about tech governance going forward, and so I'm disappointed, again, independent of what you think of a particular court resolution, I'm disappointed we don't have more clarity about the norms and legal rules that govern policy interventions.
Karen, this may be more for you than others, but I welcome, obviously, all perspectives. One of the consistent themes that you hear from the trust and safety community is that the minute someone leads a Meta or a Google and that vast infrastructure for trust and safety and goes to a smaller company, they are astonished by how little is available to them, how little tooling is available to them. They're literally relying on Zendesk, right? And they're back to building. And they are also constantly having to defend against a conception of trust and safety investments as a cost center rather than an investment in long-term value generation and a good product long-term. And so I'd be interested in hearing, well, any of your thoughts on what are the tools that need to be out there, that need to be more available? How do we think about creating greater access to a wider range of entrepreneurs and startups to basic trust and safety mechanisms or products in a way that our current structure just hasn't created and allowed? And Karen, I think for you specifically, how do you narrate internally why trust and safety is not a cost center, but instead a key component of value creation?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and I feel like any product manager or engineer that's been in tech for at least a year understands that safety and growth go hand in hand, that these are not binaries, that if you want to have revenue growth, if you want to work with your advertisers, that it's absolutely key to doing business, in addition to keeping users safe and ensuring we're raising up better practices in society. So I do think that these go hand in hand. And I think we see really, really good examples of when things go wrong, of why that is. So a couple things. One is it's a really good call out that at small and medium companies, there might not be some of the resources. I think this is why industry associations, as well as access to tooling and open sourcing that tooling can be helpful. We have a content safety API that we have and we offer to partners for free, which helps them proactively identify abusive child safety material and combat that abuse, and then report it to NCMEC, which is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And that's just one example of how we are trying to raise the bar in the ecosystem by making those tools free. Another thing that we do is we have Perspectives API, which is through our Google Jigsaw, which is a classifier to help reduce toxic content. I think something that makes me optimistic is with generative AI and the focus on responsible AI, and there has been a really heavy focus. You see companies coming together to raise the bar in the industry and contribute in ways that I think will be helpful to small and medium companies as well. Things like the Coalition for Content Provenance, the C2PA, and companies coming together to say, we want to find a meeting of the minds about the technical standards and potentially tooling to help in this area. And so I think areas like that to help bring out standards, make tools free and open and available can help to raise the bar for others as well. I think that's just really critical and important. And so it's something that we do.
Great. We could talk about this for hours more, but just wanted to say thank you to our panelists and release you for an afternoon break. We will reconvene for a Tech Hub reception downstairs and dinner. And so I just want to say thank you and see you later tonight.
Thanks.
And one more quick thing to add. Barron and I think also Matt will be leading a hike up the Ute Trail. And so if you want to go meet in the lobby here, 10 minutes? Yeah, so if you haven't done it, I recommend. It's a great hike. It's hard, yeah. Barron will be the one yelling about Jim Jordan. So.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. That was